All right, we are back in Salt Lake City, and we want to bring in the former U.S. ambassador to Germany and the former acting director of national intelligence, Richard Grenell. Rick, good to have you with us tonight. The news this evening is about these 1,000 documents that John Ratcliffe, the director of national intelligence now, has released to the Durham investigation. And it's getting a ton of attention. John Brennan is pushing back and saying that the quotes that were released from him about this effort to get Hillary's campaign to sort of loop the Trump campaign into this Russia conspiracy theory, John Brennan says there's nothing to that. They were just letting the president know what they were picking up on Russian intel. What do you say to all that?
Well, if John Brennan is so certain, why doesn't he come down on the side of transparency? Look, we've had a lot of people, Susan Rice, James Comey, Brennan, a whole bunch of people scrambling, doing everything they can to not have transparency. Transparency isn't political, Martha. Transparency is supposed to be our friend. I will give you that it is very unique to have transparency in Washington, though. Washington types want to hold the information. That's what they've done. What John Brennan needs to understand is that the information from career intelligence officials from the very beginning was pushed aside and classified away because it didn't fit the narrative that the Obama administration, that the Obama-Biden administration, Susan Rice, James Comey, and Brennan, all of them, what they wanted to spoon feed to the American people. This is just the facts. Anyone who wants to disagree with this should come down on the side of transparency and say, let's look at all of the documents, see how this started, see what kind of individuals were briefed, what kind of career intelligence official statements we were dealing with that were pushed aside. Let's have a full, transparent look at this situation. I think that after so many years of hearing Washington politicians and the insiders spoon feed the American people misinformation, we need to go back to the beginning and be transparent. What are you afraid of?
Well, speaking of transparency, you were acting DNI. You released some documents. This DNI is doing the same, following the president's orders to declassify documents. But, Rick, there's a lot of frustration, not just Democrats who are blowing this off and saying it's 28 days before an election, but also from Republicans up on the Hill who say the FBI and CIA have been slow-walking things. They don't know where the Durham report is. And, again, you're 28 days from an election. There's a lot of frustration here.
Yeah, I take the point, but let's remove the 28 days because the most important part of this is not the election. The most important part is making sure that our government, our U.S. government, the greatest country in the whole world, does not weaponize the power that they have. Individuals weaponize it against their political enemies. Look, I've spent 11 years at the State Department. When these types of things happen, we condemn them. We call out opposition parties in other countries who try to do things like this. This was not a peaceful transition of power. They went after candidate Trump. They went after newly elected Donald Trump, the president-elect, his entire team. It's pretty clear. I go back to the fact that there is a lot of foot dragging from Washington, D.C. types. It's not a Republican versus Democrat issue. This is a Washington versus the rest of America issue. We've got to clean up Washington. I think what you saw from President Trump just now on the COVID issue is the classic President Trump that we hired. Here is somebody who doesn't, talk about filing some sort of piece of legislation or co-sponsoring a bill, which is what Joe Biden talks about what he did when asked about his accomplishments. This is President Trump saying, you know what, I experienced this drug, it was amazing, I'm going to get it through the FDA, and I'm going to make sure that everybody gets it for free who has COVID. I mean, that's an amazing outsider perspective. He's a man of action. He's not a man of co-signing pieces of legislation.
There's obviously a big war of words going on between prior heads of the CIA and the DNI. And here's Michael Hayden, the former CIA director, talking about transparency and trust and truth, which you just talked about. But here's his version.
Truth is really important, but especially in intelligence. President Trump doesn't care about facts. President Trump doesn't care about the truth. He doesn't listen to his experts. If Trump gets another term, I think many alliances will be gone and America will be alone. And that's a real problem.
He came after you and called you a pretty nasty name, Rick. What do you have to say to the former CIA director?
Well, look, I'm not going to get into name calling. I think that's silly. We're the greatest country in the world, and we can have policy disagreements, but let's talk about actual facts and policy discussions. Here's a man who attacked me with really shameless words, all because I was trying to be transparent to share information. So he can talk about facts and he can talk about, wanting to see facts, but his whole tirade against me was because I was calling for more transparency. So again, I go back to the fact this is the Washington game of pretending that you know something on public television, and then when you go into the bowels of the House where you're under oath in front of lawyers, you say something completely different, which is what Susan Rice and Samantha Power and the whole team did. So I think we can settle this. Practical people outside of Washington, they just view this as all Washington talk. And what they would say is, let's just see the transcripts. Let's go back to the facts and look at it. The American people are smart enough to know when they see something, they can come to their own conclusion. But that's just not the way Washington works. They like to spoon feed the American people.
We've heard from the Trump campaign a lot of pushback on polls. The polls that have come out since the first debate, Rick, have seen Joe Biden increasing his lead, not just nationally, but also in some of these key battleground states. Considering that, understanding the skepticism from the Trump campaign about polls, what does Vice President Pence have to do tonight? Quickly, if you could.
Well, look, I think Vice President Pence just has to talk about the facts. Kamala Harris is one of the most radical senators that we've ever seen come around. She's the queen of the cancel culture. She has said that she had compared immigration officials, ICE officials, to the KKK. This is somebody who is a real radical. And what Vice President Pence just needs to do is just ask her a question and demand an answer, and the American people will see just how radical she is.
Rick Grenell, we appreciate your time outside the debate hall. Thank you.